Hey everyone, welcome to the new episode, the first episode ever of Get Baked. What is Get Baked? Get Baked is a new online show. It's live streaming. It's all about baking. It's all about bringing our funnest people, our coolest people, our greatest bakers that we know to talk to you directly about whatever the topic is this week. This week the topic is red velvet. So there's a lot of crazy stuff about red velvet, like it's becoming Oreos, it's becoming this, it's becoming this. People love it, people hate it. It is such a hot topic that we thought, you know what, let's bring some of our friends in and talk about it. I'm Babette Peppa. I am the founder of BakeSpace.com, and we are the producers of this show. And I wanted to let you know that my co-host is Nichelle Stevens of Cupcakes Take the Cake, the #1 cupcake blog on the web. Nichelle, do you want to introduce yourself?
Hi, everybody. My name is Nichelle, and I started Cupcakes Take the Cake in December 2004, and the growth of cupcakes and the growth of the blog have been in parallel. In addition to that, red velvet cake, the flavor of red velvet cake has grown as well. And it's really interesting because it has roots in the South, it has roots in soul food, it has roots in New York. Maybe it was discovered in the Waldorf Astoria, who knows? But it's something that everyone is curious about, whether or not they actually know what the flavor of red velvet is.
I absolutely agree. So when you said our next show should be, our first show should be red velvet, I thought, what a great topic. I want to also introduce our guest today. Leslie, do you want to introduce yourself first and tell people where they can find you online?
Sure. I'm Leslie Macarella. I'm the author of BakeThisCake.com, and what we do there is specialize in historic and vintage cake recipes. So red velvet cake is right up my alley in some ways, because I really don't do a modern red velvet cake, but we'll talk about that, I'm sure. I've been blogging for maybe about 3 years, and we're just all over the web and sharing a little history with a slice of cake, basically. So fun to be here. I feel so techie.
Is this your first Google Hangout?
This is my first Google Hangout.
Okay, we all have to give her a round of applause. Yay! It's fun. You'll love it. For those of you who are watching at home, who are watching on Google Plus or watching on our YouTube channel or at BakeSpace or on, we just posted on Twitter as well. If you want to communicate with us and chat live, you can use the hashtag #GetBaked. All one word, and we'll follow that. Nichelle's going to follow the conversations on Twitter. I'm going to follow the conversations on Google+, and then post-event, post-show, if you have any questions, reach out to us. I'm at BakeSpace on Twitter, and then before we end the show, we're going to make sure that all of our guests tell you where they can find, where you can find them on the web if you have any specific questions for them, of course. And Nichelle is, Nichelle, are we doing Cupcake Blog as your Twitter handle? Okay, cool. Now, Nicole, do you want to introduce yourself?
Yeah, hi. I'm Nicole Taylor. I can be found all over the interwebs via Food Culturist, Twitter, Instagram, and all that good stuff. I'm really excited and happy that you guys invited me to come on, because I just finished a cookbook manuscript, and I have a entire chapter titled Red Velvet Cake and Such. So this is exciting. Thanks for having me on.
Well, I was excited because I realized Nichelle had hosted a red velvet cupcake debate in New York City. Do you guys want to tell us a little bit about what happened there?
Yes, I did that, I think it was like 4 years ago, and the interesting thing was I wanted to just talk about red velvet, and it wasn't even as popular as far as mass market back then as it is now. More, it was something for like people who are baking geeks, and we really deep into talking about cocoa powder and flour and the gluten in flour. It was almost like a science lecture as much as it was about baking. And we had a couple people bring in different red velvet things, red velvet cupcakes, red velvet marshmallows. It was a really fun event. And the thing that the big takeaway about that event is that bakers really are interested in not just the recipes but the origins of the food that they're cooking, and they also want to make it more healthy, because some people wanted to know about sugar-free or gluten-free or vegan. So I think it was really informative, and it's something that I don't know if there's other cake flavors that would elicit such strong discussion. I don't know about you. What do you think, Nicole or Leslie?
I think it's a huge debate. Everyone has a debate about red velvet cake, cream cheese frosting, boiled frosting, pecans, beets. Artificial flavoring. People love to talk about it.
I feel bad about the artificial flavoring because today I wanted to commemorate Red Velvet. So I took, usually on our kitchen party show it's like 5 p.m., 8 p.m. Eastern, and I can drink. But then I thought it's so weird to be on a Google Hangout and not have a cocktail. So I thought I would celebrate the first Get Baked with a gin and tonic, but I used one little drop of red food coloring in honor of today's.
Ah.
I was thinking, Nichelle and I, when we first started talking about this show, we were talking about how, like, some people ask, like, the number one question is, I forgot which baker we were talking to, but they said, if I eat this recipe, will it make my teeth turn red? And I thought, oh no, I better not put too many drops. Leslie did she did make a cake. Do you want to show us the cake?
It did. It's a test cake, so it doesn't look perfect. But I'm going to pull it back a little bit. I tried to put some rose swirls on it. And I have to admit, this is a red velvet cake, but it's an historic red velvet cake, so the inside of it is not even red. It's made with beets.
Oh.
And I've made it before. I changed it up a little bit this time, but I didn't add any red food coloring. So it actually is brown inside, maybe a little hint of pink, but I did taste a few little swatches of it, and this is going to have to be my birthday cake because my birthday's tomorrow, so we'll slice it and see what it looks like inside.
Are you a Pisces or is that Aquarius?
I'm a Pisces. I'm a triple Pisces, whatever that means, but that's what my sister tells me.
I'm March 8th, so I'm a little partial to Pisces. So when it starts getting to this time of the year, I'm like, when's your birthday? So can you tell us a little bit about that recipe, and then also, will you sometime either after the show or even while the show's going on, can you tweet out that link to the recipe? Do you have that on your blog?
Yes, I have a recipe for red velvet cake on the blog. It was a huge cake, for a holiday celebration, and it was also made with red beets. But also this time I narrowed it down to a small cake. I used cake flour. No red food coloring at all, but it's basically the same recipe, and I'm happy to tweet that out or however you like. I'll look it up while we're talking.
Absolutely. No, I mean, I think because folks who are tuning in to this show, they're very interested in having those recipes. And then on BakeSpace, too, I will find some of our red velvet. I know we have a whole bunch of cupcakes. A whole bunch of members have submitted recipes. I'm a, cream cheese frosting gal. Are you guys cream cheese frosting, or what are the other options? I didn't even know there were other options.
Whoops. Well, mine is made. Oops, sorry. Go ahead. Should I talk? Oh, I was just going to say that my recipe that I'll give you a link to is an unusual meringue frosting, but this cake is made with an heirloom custard frosting. So just the way you make a gravy, starting with a little roux, is a little simple milk and cornstarch custard that's hot, then cooled, then added to a whole bunch of butter and actual granulated sugar, not powdered sugar. It's a very lightly sweet frosting, and it's very old-fashioned, like from the 1850s, but it's very wonderful. So that's my favorite frosting for red velvet.
I feel oh, go ahead.
I'm a cream cheese. I feel like that's the classic Southern red velvet cake when you use cream cheese frosting. But I also know folks from the South who use the boiled frosting, where they kind of whip it up in a pan with sugar and what have you. But I think cream cheese is the definitive thing for a great red velvet cake.
I think, Nichelle, there's someone on Twitter. Did you have someone on Twitter that wanted to give a shout out to?
Oh yeah. Kimberly, Bake Love Give, who was on our Valentine's Day show. she was just saying that the chemistry of red velvet is her favorite part of the process. And it's funny because when I mentioned about talking about the cocoa powder, um, I was looking up that some people are concerned about the vinegar, the buttermilk, whether or not you're using Dutch process or regular cocoa powder. I mean, there's a lot. It's balancing the acidity and the alkalinity, if I'm pronouncing that right, to make that cake what it should be. Otherwise, it's going to taste gummy. So it's really interesting. You kind of have to be very careful about substitutions with the red velvet cake.
I'm not even a real big red velvet fan. I like just pure chocolate. I like just going straight to the source. But I feel like every time we're talking about red velvet, we're always talking about historical stuff, or we're talking about this classic recipe. Does anyone know like where this started, and or where we think it started, even though if maybe there's still kind of like some debate?
Well, since I read a lot of history and I know everybody has likely looked into this, and I think there's never really going to be an answer, but my own personal view is that, in the old days they had devil cake, which was a chocolate cake, and they had angel cake, devil and angel cake. And when you mess with the frost, with the batter a little bit, with the baking soda, vinegar, things like that, it makes the batter velvety. And it actually turns a chocolate devil cake almost red brown. And I actually think a red velvet cake was just a velvet cake, which was a chocolate cake. And then I think literally, like the Waldorf Astoria folks came in, added red food coloring to it, a lot of red food coloring to it and whatnot, and it is beautiful, bright red like that. But I think quite historically speaking, it wasn't starting out as a bright red cake. That's just my guess.
So where do we go wrong? Why is it now all of a sudden like hot? Like if I notice, I think it's almost like one of those things you see at this grocery store, and it's like just the vibrant red makes you go, what is that?
Yeah.
When did that happen, or do you have any insight into why they do that? I mean, obviously, probably what I just said is the reason why they do that, so it gets people's attention. But it just seems so strange. If it's a chocolate cake, how can it be so vibrantly red?
Right. Yeah, I think what Nichelle was talking about is part of the intrigue of the cake. Usually when it has a bright white frosting and a bright red interior, it's beautiful. It's charming and fascinating. In fact, I have to make a red velvet cake for 100 people for a funeral. It's odd, and it's not something I would think of as a funeral cake, and it wasn't something I would have recommended for this. It's our family friend, but she used to be an actress. She passed away in her 90s, and my family was like, she has to have something theatrical and something beautiful and feminine and festive, really. So I do think that's what red velvet is about, and that's what the intrigue is. And then when people taste it, like Nichelle was mentioning, the chocolate flavor you wouldn't expect. It just gives you an added, double take. I think it's
Well, when you mentioned the cake you're making for the person who passed away, the first thing I thought of was steel magnolias, and that's one of the ways that red velvet kind of seeped into pop culture because of that movie with the armadillo cake.
Right.
And it's interesting how much pop culture and the internet, meaning like just I'll look and see things that are tagged red velvet, whether it's pictures of red velvet or people talking about they're trying the new red velvet Oreos or things like that. And what happens is all that stuff, that grassroots stuff, bubbles up, and then the big brands are like, how can we make money off of it? And I think red velvet in a way is kind of like the pumpkin spice latte that was like this past fall. Now red velvet's in because it's Valentine's Day. It's great for Christmas because of the color, and I don't mind all this attention just as long as people don't forget like the historical things that you and Nicole know all about, and hopefully it encourages more people to bake, because now that they've tasted, I guess, the imitation, maybe they'll want to go and figure out what the real deal is.
And when I think about red velvet cake, it's funny. Not until Michelle had this red velvet cake debate did I really figured out or realized this whole origin of the Waldorf Astoria. I was growing up in the South in Georgia. You really only got a red velvet cake once a year, and it was the holidays. It was either like around Christmas time or maybe in the summertime at a picnic or some kind of celebration thing. And so I didn't know anything about the Waldorf Astoria. Actually, now when I see red velvet cake so much, it kind of it's not the same. I don't get the same reaction, because before it was like red velvet cake, you only see that once or twice a year, but it's everywhere now, you know. I still love a good slice regardless though.
Yeah, I was reading an article where they said they have the red velvet flavor now in deodorants, in toothpaste. I mean, I made red velvet pancakes for the first time just because we're talking about this, but I know a lot of people do. I mean, the flavor is really becoming popular now.
You know, I was just on Google and I was looking, and I was like overwhelmed by the variety and just the beauty of these red velvet images. But then I also, when I was scrolling down here, let's see, where was it? Oh, here it is. The red velvet devil. It made me think of you, Leslie, when you said about how originally it was a devil's food cake, and then it became, I wonder if they even realize how close they are to maybe the original origin. But there is just some amazing. I might have even afraid to go to Pinterest and like search red velvet, because then I'll get lost forever. But definitely. I just think it's so. I mean, but if you notice, all of the color shades are pretty much the same. I mean, they're not. There's not really a variety. It's almost like if you make red velvet, it must look like these cookies, for example. The same thing, where they're all the same color. How do you get that color?
I'll say this. I tested 3 times. I have not a red velvet cake in my book. I actually have a red velvet cheesecake. So the bottom layer is a red velvet, and then the next layer is a New York style cheesecake, and then cream cheese frosting with nuts on the top. I tested it so many times because I was like, the first time it was too light, and the second time it was dark, but I felt like there was too much cocoa in it. So you're right, Babette. You have to get the color right. Either it starts to look like a chocolate cake, and it's really not a chocolate cake. Or you can put too much cocoa in there, and it starts to not be a red velvet cake any longer.
Right. I learned my red food coloring lesson, I guess, with this cake that I'm going to send you the link for. It's called Miss Ruby Lee's Dangerous Red Velvet Cake Recipe with Baby Red Beets. And I was going to try to make it with just beets, but I realized the red wasn't going to come out in the cake. So it was such a huge cake, it might be maybe 6 layers, that sort of thing. So I had to go to the market to get red food coloring, and you know, it comes sometimes in little squeeze bottles, and I bought 4 packages. It was all they had at one store. I had to go to another, get 2 more packages just to pull out the red, and I decided this is ridiculous. I'm driving all over town, so I went to a big food store and I bought a quart-size bottle of red food coloring, because it takes a lot of red food coloring for these cakes. And I came home, and then I put it away as I was getting everything prepared, and then when I went to grab the bottle from the cupboard, the thought went through my mind, wouldn't it be terrible if I dropped this red bottle of food coloring? And I not only dropped the red bottle of food coloring, I somehow opened the lid as I was bringing it off the counter, and then flipped it around, and it splattered all over my kitchen. And it's still in my kitchen even after the kitchen's been painted twice. If you paint the kitchen, red will seep through the painting on the walls. It's unbelievable. And what I learned was I had no idea that a cake required so much red food coloring to get that red. You know, it really does.
You know, that reminds me, I was watching Lockup last night. This is totally like weird. I am addicted to that show. I don't know why. I have this fascination with people that are like sentenced to prison. But there was a guy, when you said how you can't get the red velvet out, he said that there was a guy who was murdered in a spot who they every time they paint over it, it comes back. This
Right.
reminds me of your problem that you have. Where
That's
it's like, I mean, what
that's my kitchen.
is that because of the red? I mean, do you think it's the red coloring specific, or what do you think is the just the
You
oil,
know,
like the?
I don't know what the food coloring is made out of, but and maybe it would have happened with anything that might have an oil base. I'm not sure, but I can tell you that I scrubbed the heck out of that kitchen and the cupboards and the walls. And right now, if you went in and scrubbed hard with a sponge on my wall, on a yellow or white part of my kitchen wall, it would start peeking through. I have no idea how it happens, but it's kind of like a magic trick. When you come to my house, I'll show you a little mystery.
Yeah,
So
I was.
I actually looked up the red food dye. I think it's actually supposed to be made out of beetles. Now I'm sure there's some other chemicals and stuff in it to make it shelf stable, but when I first started kind of doing some research on red, I think it's red number 5. There is some natural stuff that comes from it, but I think one of the things as far as the popularity of red velvet is definitely the color. And this is an experiment I would love to do one day, is to actually have a blind taste test and have people taste a chocolate cake, a red velvet cake, and a vanilla cake. And maybe they all have cream cheese frosting, so don't let the frosting, like throw them off. And figure out if they can tell which one is actually the red velvet. Because in a
That's a good
way, a
idea.
red velvet is like the combination of both a chocolate and a vanilla cake. So I just think it's really interesting how much the red plays into it. But as a historian of cake, you know that it's more about this flavor and this chemical reaction between, the buttermilk and the vinegar and the beets. Leslie, does your cake recipe call for buttermilk?
Yes. Well, in my cake recipe, I'm using powdered cultured buttermilk.
Okay.
But I have used various. It does have buttermilk, but you can either use fresh or powdered culture. I just never have a bottle of a carton of buttermilk in my refrigerator, so I thought everybody else must be the same. I might, try that. So I usually use that.
We always make cornbread with buttermilk, so there's always buttermilk in my house.
Oh.
And
That's not a problem.
I have to chime in here specifically about the Southern red velvet cake, speaking of buttermilk, because I don't know any other way except for to have fresh buttermilk. And the other piece to that, we're talking about red food coloring and the beets. In the South, if you didn't have white lily flour to make a Southern red velvet cake, you weren't really making a red velvet cake. So some people say, for a classic Southern red velvet cake, you need white lily flour. Who knows? I mean, nowadays, White Lily has actually, they got bought up by a big brand. I can't think of the brand. Maybe you remember, Michelle, the
Pillsbury.
Okay. So, yeah, they got bought up by them. And so their facility, which used to be in Tennessee, actually has moved to the Midwest now. So
I think it's in Ohio. And I went to an event. It's actually, it's Smucker's that owns Pillsbury, that owns White Lily. But long story short, the reason why white lily flour works so well with red velvet cake, because it actually is the flour that has, I think, the least amount of gluten. It's a much lighter flour than the other ones in their, stable of flours. So, and we weren't even talking about red velvet. We just did this whole thing about trying all these different flours, and they kind of showed us. I thought it was really interesting. I mean, when people say bacon is a science, I think when you talk, red velvet is definitely the case study of the science of bacon.
Okay.
I was going to show you guys that Oreo picture. Let me show you it real quick. Now, this leads me to believe that this has gotten out of control. Now, here we go. Red velvet Oreo cookies. First of all, have any of you tried this?
Yes, I've tried them.
Okay, what did you think?
You know what? I hadn't had Oreos in a while, so it was actually just good to have Oreos. And it's funny because Oreos kind of a little chalky, so they're actually a milder version of Oreos, and it made me like. If you compare the regular Oreos to Red Velvet, I actually like the Red Velvet better because it was a little bit less chalky. I really didn't. I know they said it puts a little cream cheese flavor in the filling. I didn't really taste that, but as a cookie, it's all right. You know, I take it or leave it. I think one of the interesting things about like Oreos getting into it and making it limited edition, because they've been doing limited edition. They did like they look so awful. The watermelon Oreos. I mean, I didn't even want to touch those. I mean, they just look so fake. And I think the difference with Red Velvet, one is the appeal because it's trendy and the flavor, I mean, the color is red. But the other thing about Red Velvet is I think people are already kind of hacking Red Velvet. Like, they'll do other things as long as it has the red and the cocoa and like cream cheese. And I think like I'm seeing like Red Velvet Oreo trifles being made on Pinterest. Like people are already kind of like, oh, I could do something with that. They're not eating it just to eat it. They're using it as a means to another end with other desserts or snacks.
That sounds delicious, by the way. You guys are making me hungry. I'm like, I wish I need dessert right now. You know, I found this Bailey's Coffee Creamer Red Velvet Cupcake. I wonder what that tastes like. I guess it's like a chocolate creamer with that's maybe dyed red. I don't know. And then I think these are, what are these? These are donuts. Entenmann's has new donuts flavored red velvet. Have you guys ever tried those?
I haven't tried those, but I've definitely had the red velvet donut. Again, it's just really like I think I had the a cake one that was red velvet.
Mm.
So it didn't have the chocolate cocoa. It was just the color with a cream cheese type glaze. It was okay.
Here's Dunkin' Donuts Red Velvet Hot Latte. And then this I'm really afraid of, this next one. Lay's Red Velvet Cake Chips. I don't know. I mean, what do you guys think?
I don't know. I mean, for me, I delayed even posting a recipe for red velvet cake on my blog and that was a couple years ago, because I thought it was so overdone then. But I had so many requests from my readers to put a red velvet cake up that I did go for it, and I had a lot of fun with it. And of course, I do love the cake myself. So I just see where people are just they're just taken with it, you know, and it's fun to run with it, but it is kind of crazy how far they go with it. It's amazing.
My question is, what is next? I think like what Leslie and Nicole are doing and are more about the classic and not being gimmicky about Red Velvet. But I wonder what is the, I guess, shelf life of Red Velvet as a flavor, not necessarily as a cake, and how far will it go? I'm actually interested in maybe experimenting on my own. I have this idea of a recipe I still haven't done. I'm actually doing something savory with Red Velvet. I actually want to do like Red Velvet fried chicken. And
I have to say, I had Red Velvet fried chicken. I just remembered. Whoa. I mean, is that crazy or what? You know, they have a new chocolate chicken place in downtown Los Angeles.
I've heard about that place. Yeah. They do it?
Yeah, everything is chocolate. Chocolate mashed potatoes. It's white chocolate mashed potatoes and chocolate chicken, which is basically, I think what they do is just put a little cocoa powder in the flour before they bake it or fry it. And I think they do the same with the red velvet. They put a little maybe red food coloring in with the cocoa powder, dredge.
Does it change the color of the chicken?
Yeah, the skin on the outside is the color of the chocolate is dark brown or red for red velvet, and it's
amazing.
It's interesting. You know, it wasn't the best fried chicken I've had because I thought it was just a little bit greasy, but it was fun, and it was a fun take on different food flavors.
I guess my thoughts are every time I have, something that's not a cake and it's red velvet, it tends to be just mediocre. I haven't had anything that just like blew my world, like, oh my gosh, this is amazing. I think all of the kind of catchy red velvet things are mediocre.
Yeah. See, my goal is to take red velvet back to brown. But we'll see. Well, I have to cut it. I haven't tried my cake yet. You want to see what the inside looks like?
Yeah.
Yes,
Okay,
yes,
'cause
absolutely.
not one crumb was left in the pans, which usually you can slice off a little hump or something and see what it's like. So I'll just, I'm going to see if I can, how would I be able to cut this? I'm going to cut a cake on live web TV, you know. This will be interesting. And you will see, I think.
The cake is gorgeous on the
you,
outside.
oh, thank you. It's a little rough. Now I'm going to see if I can maneuver a slice without dropping the whole cake right onto a plate. And I don't have a fork, but can you see the color of the cake? It's quite bright. Now this is made with beets, like pureed, steamed baby organic beets, in a puree with a little strawberries and raspberries, and then a little ricotta cheese and honey as the sort of flavor base. And everything else would probably just be standard. But it's made with cake flour, buttermilk, butter, sugar. Everything else is about the same, and cocoa powder, whatnot. But I haven't tasted it yet. I wish I could share it.
Oh my God. I'm like, well, you know, you're actually not that far from me because I'm in LA as well, and I want to be. I'm looking at that picture, and all I can think in my head is, "Get in my mouth now!" Like,
Right?
Yeah,
amazing.
maybe your mom will want to come over and pick up a. Well, we'll see. Whatever you like, it's there. And I don't know if I should taste it. All I have is a knife. Shall I taste it?
Taste it.
Okay. Okay, let's taste it.
We're all like,
I have to tell you that I'm almost my own worst critic, so we'll see. Because it's a little bit different, but I did taste the batter. And I think if you're a baker, you know the batter has to taste great, or the cake won't, right?
Exactly. I've had a red velvet cake with a ricotta and mascarpone frosting. A friend of mine, she nixed the cream cheese, and it just took it to another level. And I never thought of doing it that way, and I really like that cream cheese. I mean, that frosting without the cream cheese. It was really good.
Oh, that sounds good.
I would just eat that frosting as a shot. Just
yeah. I think this cake is definitely tasty. I will say, I never say that about my cakes, but it doesn't taste like a traditional red velvet cake, and I'm not sure why. So, you know, maybe what you were talking about, Nichelle, if you put a blindfold on, I think I could taste that was, you know, I'm gonna have to put my two red velvet cakes side by side and put a test taste on them.
Oh, please, and write it up or send us let us know. I think it would be great if I could get that sponsored and do red velvet taste tests across the country.
That would be
I think that's a great idea. Great idea.
Very fun.
So, Nichelle, I wanted to show you this. This is red velvet onion rings.
Oh, that's.
And then I found red velvet waffles with chicken. So the red velvet can be added to whatever is the extra, maybe not the actual item, but there's a ton of like savory red velvet. This is very pretty. That's nice.
The waffles, that SoCo place is a few blocks from my house. The red velvet waffles, I feel like, are really popular everywhere.
I have never seen those.
Sweet Revenge in the Village in New York, they do red velvet waffles. I mean, as a home baker or cook or whatever, I played around with red velvet popcorn. Just basically just made the made like a sauce to put on, you know, freshly popped popcorn, which had cocoa powder, butter, actually buttermilk, a little vanilla extract, and a little red food coloring. And I mean, very little red food coloring. It actually looked like pink velvet popcorn, but it tastes good because it was like caramel corn, kind of. It was really good.
Interesting. Yeah, I think the biggest problem I've had is trying to get the color red without using red food dye. And I don't know why I'm possessed with the idea that I need to do that. I just like the idea of having a red cake without red food coloring in it. But I can't quite, you know, I tried using, and well, I'm going to try again because I have a bunch of professional cake baking friends, and their latest tip to me was to try using a dehydrated strawberry powder, you know, and I have to put those in a historic cake recipe, so I have to mess with it a little bit. But the dehydrated strawberries that I tried to use for this cake didn't work out because they weren't flaky and powdery, and they weren't able to be pureed. So the closest I could get is beets, but they're tangy and they have their own flavor, and they don't really taste good on their own. So they have to be honeyed or, you know, strawberried and, you know, sugared up a little bit to get that. But they do provide a nice little tang. But I'm still on that journey. If anybody thinks of some super natural thing that has a bright red coloring ability, I need that.
I know Nichelle, speaking of that, Nichelle asked a question earlier, what's the next big thing in red velvet? And I do think the next thing is people finding alt ways to get the color. I see a lot of people now are linking, you know, the whole gluten and food coloring thing is all kind of connected. So I think the next big trend in red velvet is folks using, you know, what you talked about, Leslie, strawberries and using the powder, kind of what beyond the beet, for better words, for coloring. So I think that's the next big thing. Beyond the little, you know, the red velvet onion rings. I think that stuff is going to go away. I really do.
Also, you Nicole, I don't know. I'm assuming you've heard of Adrian Miller's book, Soul Food.
Of course.
Yes. Well, that whole chapter about red cola and red drinks, and the history of Africans and African Americans with red food, and one of the things is hibiscus. Now, I'm assuming that some of that burns off, but that might be something that may work. But I think one of the things is if people can start, you know, really thinking about what the flavor they're trying to get at, maybe they won't be as concerned with the color.
Right.
But the whole, and going back to what Nicole was saying about, like, when she was growing up, how often she saw red velvet, which was not that often. And red is like, it connotes like a celebration of something big or momentous. So maybe that's why it's good for a wedding or a funeral or, you know, something like that. Yeah. And I think it's really interesting because cake on its own is something that means you're celebrating something. So red just takes it up a notch. So I think it's like all of these things are related. It's not like these things are just happening, you know, as a coincidence. It's like we're really starting to see the connection with our culture and our food more than we used to. And I didn't mean to give you like almost a plug for food culturists, but I just mean that that's really what's going on, and I think it's great.
I mean, when you look at hibiscus, there's so many different cultures, from the Caribbean folks to Asian. So many people use that leaf, hibiscus leaf. As I'm sitting here, you were talking, I'm like, how do you take the hibiscus and put it in a cake? We need to tweet that out. Like, has someone done that? Have you done it, Leslie?
I've done it. Yeah, I don't know why, but I think for another cake, it was a custard topping for, I think, our Marco Polo cake, which is like a cheese, an old-fashioned Italian cheesecake that sits on top of it. It's like a 72-hour prep cake, you know. It was like a crazy, but some old-fashioned recipes. And we wanted to use a natural pink base. And that hibiscus, and I've now tested it a number of times, it's so much fun. Like, I've made hibiscus cocktails, hibiscus ice cream, this hibiscus custard. I've flavored batters with it. The only trick to it is almost the same as the beets. It comes with its own sort of tang aftertaste that isn't exactly sweet, and it may not even be a pleasant taste. So it requires extra sugaring, which, you know, I always kind of try to, I know cakes are all about sugar, but I do try to, you know, keep it down a little bit. But that particular hibiscus leaf has a little twang to it. But it's so prevalent now. You can get hibiscus tea, which they put out as cold hibiscus tea, and all you have to do is drop a couple of these hibiscus tea pods into a pitcher of water and fill it with even cold, a little bit of hot maybe to start, and then cold water. You will have a bright red hibiscus fruit punch, basically, and then you can use that to flavor a lot of things or color things.
I think I have some hibiscus tea in the kitchen right now. I think I have a container for cold tea, and I should go get it. I wanted to tell you, I was looking at the kitchen, thekitchen.com, and they gave 5 alternatives to red food coloring. They said hibiscus flowers. They said boiled cranberries. They said red beet juice. Number 4 is red beet powder, and number 5 is pomegranate juice.
Okay. And then maybe even cherry juice is quite red or bright pink. I'm going to try all of them. I will be on all of them.
we will expect that invitation when you make all those cakes. we'll want to come over. You know, Nichelle, I don't know anything about the cultural red food story that you started going into, but I don't know anything about it. So it sounds really interesting. Can you bring us a little bit of insight into that?
Well, from what I can remember, because I was actually looking at the chapter yesterday, but basically red was almost like a signifier for different things. I mean, the article or the chapter was talking a little bit about the cola nut and the red cola nut and red Coca-Cola or red Coke, what people would drink. And it also kind of talks about, you know, like people, well, I mean, maybe an overgeneralization, but people like red Kool-Aid, like that. Like that was just like something that was so special as opposed to the grape Kool-Aid or orange or lemonade or something like that. So, but there is definitely like some of this stuff is coming from Africa, some of it's coming from the South during, you know, I was gonna say during this slavery times and stuff like that. So, but it's really interesting to me because, you know, red, I think, actually whets people's appetite. I mean, I heard that that's the reason why McDonald's has the red and the yellow and the golden arches. So I think that in some ways, maybe one reason why African Americans, in maybe when they were first brought here and stuff like that, then maybe the red was to help them to, you know, to eat, because, you know, this, I mean, also I just watched Book of Negroes over the weekend, so I'm more on a historical thought plane than I normally am, but I almost think that might be one of the reasons why. It's like this is something to generate someone's appetite, especially if they're malnourished. So I don't know, Nicole, what do you think about that? That's just my theory.
First of all, for people who are listening and they want to dig into the chapter and the historical piece of it, the book is called Soul Food. It's a James Beard Award-winning book, and the author of the book is Adrian Miller. Yeah, I mean, he really talks about that red. We've talked about it all here today about a celebration, and particularly for African Americans, the color red is always connected back to celebration and what have you. So he does a really great job of connecting it back to. But if you look at a whole bunch of other cultures, I mean, I looked at my Instagram today, and everyone in, you know, particularly in Sunset Park, which is a neighborhood here in Brooklyn, there was a Chinese New Year parade, and you see the color red everywhere. I think it's generally a color that really uplifts, and that's why we keep talking about the red velvet cake, and it's not going away. It's just a color that means power. It makes you happy, almost like yellow.
You know, my kitchen is yellow, and I remember someone was like, "Don't ever do your kitchen yellow because it'll make you eat more."
Oh.
I thought, "Oh no, maybe we should put red sheets in the bedroom. Maybe that's the that's the next investment." So we have about 12 minutes left till the show. If you guys have any questions, I know so many people are like on the Oscar mind today, and they're like, what are they wearing and what are they doing and what are they winning and blah, 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 blah. But this show is available. It will be available on YouTube. It'll be available on Google Plus and on BakeSpace for eternity. So you can always come back and revisit as well. If you need to, if you're just tuning in now, you can also go back to the start of the show. I think we should get into some tips, though, about making red velvet cake. Do you guys want to share any of your, like, top 5 things that most people make a mistake, or that you've made a personal mistake that you're like, that's something I'll never do again, or any advice you guys have?
I have a lot of failure advices because I have had a lot of failures in my testing career. But I think that I consider this to be a chocolate cake, actually, even though it's disguised in red. But chocolate cakes are tricky, and I often test my cakes starting with my family and then my friends and then my office workers and that sort of thing. And when I first started making looking to make an excellent chocolate cake, my first try I brought to the family table, and I'm one of 6 sisters, but one of my sisters said the most incredible criticism I've ever received in my life. And it was true, by the way. She said, "Oh, that slice of chocolate cake was just as if the sands of the Sahara blew through my mouth." And that was like, wow, what a cut. But it was true. And then I took that same recipe, exact same recipe, and I added the little potion that all the bakers use, or usually do, which is a little bit of baking soda mixed with, I use cider vinegar, apple cider vinegar, and that little bubbling potion in that same chocolate cake that I served my sister that gave me such a criticism on it for being dry. It transformed that same cake recipe into a dark and shiny and moist chocolate cake, just like a miracle. So that's the magic potion that I swear by every time.
No, first I have to say, did you just say C-U-N-T?
No.
I think
No,
you called
no.
your sister. Oh,
no.
I thought you called your sister that. You said what
No.
and I was like, oh my
no.
God.
No, which way? I just said
Are
it
you
was
sure?
true. Whatever she said was true. Oh, I'm positive. No.
Yeah, because it was so funny because you just said what and I'm like, did she just say what I think she said?
No,
So
maybe it was a cutout of the mic or something.
Maybe. But that reminds me of a time when I tried to make strawberry cupcakes, like with fresh strawberries, and like the color like is never that like pretty strawberry color, and it was so bad, and I messed up an ingredient somehow, and we went to a party. And my boyfriend was there, and they convinced me to bring the cupcakes with me when I said, no, you don't understand. These cupcakes are not edible. No one should eat these. No, bring them. Everyone will love them. Put a lot of frosting on them. They'll totally work, just to make me feel better. So we're at the party, and this woman goes to my boyfriend. She says, hey, I have a secret for you. And he said, what? And she goes, those cupcakes are terrible. So I'm like,
no.
never again. I'm like, I will never bring things that I don't think are delicious to a party just because someone convinced me to try to make me feel better. So I can. Anyway,
Well,
so I'm sorry. Go ahead.
I basically had the same thing that happened at Christmas. Around Christmas time, my aunt was in town here in New York City. She came to visit from Georgia. She's not the best cook, but she's a great baker, Babette. So she's known for her red velvet cake. So I've had her recipe forever, and I made the red velvet cake because I was testing the cake chapter for my book. And basically, as soon as I made it, and I had an assistant who's been helping me sous chef, we both were like, this is not it. But I was like, I'm going to save it for my aunt so she can critique it. So I had it at the table during the holidays, and everyone tasted it, and they were like, no, it's not good. And I was like, wow, okay. But I knew it wasn't good. And Leslie, with all due respect, I totally think that red velvet cake isn't a chocolate cake. And I know for a fact it's not a chocolate cake, that I put way too much cocoa in it. You couldn't even taste the other little elements of the cake. So I felt like it was too much cocoa, and for some odd reason this time it was really dry. The frosting was great though, Babette. I tried to do your number. I was like, frosting. The frosting was great. So my tip is that for red velvet cake, two things is don't overdo the cocoa. I feel like sometimes people overdo the cocoa. So that's my biggest tip. And particularly if you're trying to do it and say it's a classic Southern one, I think the cream cheese frosting is a total must. Get your cream cheese frosting down. And I like the idea when Michelle talked about maybe do cream cheese and mascarpone, or play around with some other things in the cream cheese.
You know, I wish we would have, for this show, I wish we would have had all of us go and bake something like Leslie did to come back and see the difference in the colors. You know, that would have been actually real. We'll have to, since this is our first episode of Get Baked, we're still figuring out what format works and how to incorporate some visuals into the show as well.
I like that idea, though.
Yeah, I like that too. I like, Michelle, you and I are going to be baking a lot. But you better not eat the rest of the week, because you're gonna have trouble. In fact, I ate my husband went to a party last night for the Spirit Awards, and he had eaten all these desserts, and I said, because I had realized that I had eaten the entire quart, or like the pint of ice cream, like the whole thing. I ate the whole thing. I just didn't stop. I just ate it. So I said, hey, how many desserts did you eat while you're out? And he says, 3. And I said, okay, confession. Then that means me eating 1 pint of ice cream is not so bad when you ate 3 desserts. So it all worked out. So we'll have to pace ourselves, Michelle.
Leslie,
maybe once a month.
Leslie, I have a question as far as we're going back to the cocoa powder. Since you mentioned the baker's secret of baking soda and vinegar, do you use natural or do you use Dutch processed cocoa powder?
Oh, I know. There's another topic for controversy, right? I mean, that is so complicated. But frankly, I have tried 1,000 different varieties. I did share that link with you, Babette, by the way, for the Ruby's Dangerous Red Velvet Cake. And in that cake, I can't remember what I used. I just used like a Hershey's chocolate, powdered chocolate, and not a cocoa, you know. But this cake is Dutch processed cocoa. I was just going to show you the color of it. In this cake, I used the recipe called for the recipe from my old, I'm just duplicating it here in a smaller section. It called for just 1 tablespoon of cocoa, but I decided to double that and put 2 tablespoons of cocoa. And I just thought when you were making these comments that maybe if I pull back on that, it just seemed like not enough cocoa to put 1 tablespoon in the whole cake. But if I pull back on the cocoa, it might brighten up the pink or the red a little bit. But actually, I'm starting to see a little red now. But that could be just because we're talking so much red.
I have a funny photo to show you guys of this dog. I just found it on Google. Basically, it's a dog that's eaten a red velvet cupcake.
That is too precious.
And I wish I could get it bigger. I don't know why I can't get it bigger, but there I can get it bigger now. There I can just straighten it out a little bit. This is like a good lesson of why maybe we don't want to use a lot of dyes in our food, because when our animals get to them, it becomes trouble.
That is amazing.
Wow.
Well, we should do another Red Velvet episode in my kitchen, and maybe just rub the walls with soap and see what happens in the background.
That's hysterical. Well, let's because we only have about 3 minutes left. I want to make sure folks know where to find you guys online. I want to first thank you guys for joining Michelle and I on our first episode. We really appreciate you guys being here. And will you come back when we have another show that is a good fit for you?
I will. Thanks for having me.
Well, thanks for being such short notice. We asked her Nicole this morning at like 9 a.m. I was like, Nicole, are you available? She's like, sure, why not? Let's do this thing. So especially since you had your book, you were just finishing that, which is
Just turned the
amazing.
manuscript in 2 weeks ago. I'm like, why not? Red Velvet is on my mind.
All right, so let's see. Leslie, do you want to tell people where they can find you online, and if there's anything that you have coming up that they should look out for?
Oh, okay. Well, I guess I'm going to put that red velvet cake on there because it's the smaller and antique vintage version from the giant one that I posted before, with a few twists as we saw, and that is at BakeSpace.com. And those are historic vintage cake recipes for the modern table. You can also find me at Bake This Bread if you want to make some yeasted homemade bread or something like that. But anyway, it's been really fun. I'm very happy and honored to be here. It's been a joy.
Awesome. Nicole, do you want to tell folks where they can find you online? And also, where can they get an advanced screening or an advanced copy of your book through Amazon? Or how can they, where are you in the process?
So my book is titled The Up South Cookbook, Finding Dixie in My Brooklyn Kitchen. It will be in bookstores this fall, right in time for the holidays. They fast-tracked the book. So I'm excited about that. I can be found all over. I'm on Instagram, Twitter, Pinterest. I love Pinterest. I have an entire board dedicated to sweets on Pinterest under food cultures. So yeah, I'm excited. As well, for a long time I did a podcast, so I have 162 podcasts. I love dessert, so a lot of stories and interviews with folks about desserts, and I'm relaunching that in a few months. So
I was just going to ask you if you were still doing that.
Yeah, I took some time off to work on this book. It's a lot of work when it's so funny. I know that my next cookbook has to be something around desserts because I tested so many desserts of it, a lot.
Well, I was going to say maybe a topic for your podcast could be Nichelle and I coming in, because Nichelle is going to be in New York City with me for Tech Munch. Maybe we can come in and talk about doing like a Google Hangout, or we can talk about something. How do you find community through something? Like, think about it. Well, all right, cool. Well, we will be there for sure. And maybe we should have you come speak at Tech Munch too.
Sure, anything for you. Thank you, Babette, for having me on. And Nichelle, thank you always for thinking of me.
Oh, no problem.
So, Nichelle, were you going to say something?
I was just going to say where you can find me.
Absolutely.
You can find me on Cupcakes Take the Cake.blogspot.com. On Twitter, it's Cupcake Blog. My personal Twitter account is Niche, Niche. I keep thinking someone's going to try to buy that Twitter account. I don't know. Someone should make me an offer.
It's a cute one. We just had. Go ahead.
I'm also the cupcake expert on about.com, so cupcakes.about.com. And in fact, I'm going to open this up to Nicole and Leslie. If you want to maybe contribute something on cupcakes.about.com, I'm not sure if, Leslie, you do cupcakes, because it almost seems like cupcakes might be not historical enough for you, but if so, let me know. And that's about it.
Actually, we should do a show about cupcakes and the history and how it started and what was the thing, since that's sort of like you and I, it's like our origin. Our next episode is Baking with Booze. So that's next week. It's on our Google Plus page, also on BakeSpace.com. We're going to be putting that up as well. We're going to get a few more shows after that lined up as well, so make sure you follow us and subscribe to us on YouTube, BakeSpace TV, and I'm Babette Pepai. You can find me on Twitter at BakeSpace, on Pinterest, BakeSpace, on Instagram, BakeSpace, and YouTube, or BakeSpace TV. And thank you guys so much. If you guys have an idea for a new show, something else you want to see in baking, send us a message, and we'll do a show about it. Why not, right, Nichelle?
Yes, definitely. Yeah, I mean, from pies to like hand pies. I mean, there could be lots of different things we could talk about. It's pretty open.
Awesome, cool. Well, thanks guys for coming, and we will see you later. I hope you guys enjoy your Oscar viewing.
Thank you. Bye.
All right,
now.
we'll see you guys
Bye.
later. Bye.